Everyone, welcome. My name is Michael Anastasi. I'm the Vice President and Editor of the Tennessean. I am so pleased that you're all here this evening. We're very excited about this. The show that you're about to see has been about a year in the making since we first talked about it at our offices, and I think it's going to be a wonderful night. So without further ado, let me introduce the host of the evening to you, and that is LeBron Hill.
Wow, I've never been introduced before. That's pretty cool. Hi, I am LeBron Hill, and welcome to Black Tennessee Voices Live. I am very excited and pumped. I've been running everywhere. I am very excited to be here at the National Museum of African American Music. I am excited to be here at the Roots Theater and to be able to hear and witness all these great storytellers. Before I start kind of giving the charge for tonight, I want to kind of give you the story of Black Tennessee Voices. For me, this all started back when, in 2020, when the nation was grappling the murder of George Floyd. And a lot of people were asking questions. They were looking for answers. And for me, those answers relied on community. In an opinion column that I wrote during that time, we're all that we got. And I truly believe that when you can create a safe space for a community to come together, that's when we all strive. And that's a part of why I was able to create Black Tennessee Voices. For me, with that and with that drive that I had with the help of David Plazas, who's here tonight, and Erica Whitney, who's not here, but she's here somewhere in Nashville. And then also the late, great Dustin Barnes. He passed away, he passed away this year, and he was pretty much what you wanted a co-conspirator to be. He was there, he was present, and he was willing to give his full attention and support for us. So I'm very grateful for that. We wanted to create a better relationship with the Black community, and I think that traditional journalism was kind of doing what we like to call an about approach to covering Black communities, where they would come in in times of tragedy, in times of worry, and they would write about these situations, and then they would leave us. They would leave these communities and not create a relationship, a bond. And for me, I felt like we had to stay in those communities after those tragedies happen and make sure they know that they were appreciated and loved. And I know that sounds weird coming from a newspaper organization, but for me, it truly is about safe spaces and creating comfortability. So I wanted to also say to everyone who knows about Black Tennessee Voices before this event tonight, who knew about it? Well, thank you for your support, guys. I really do appreciate that. It's really awesome. It started 2 years ago, and now we're sitting here with Black Tennessee Voices Live, and it's truly just kind of been a culmination of all the different things we have. Now we have a newsletter that is now curated by Kyra Watts. She's a great opinion team columnist. She's a FAMU rattler. Did I say it right? Yeah, there you go. All right, I did it right. Booze. I didn't know that was. I'm sorry. I didn't know that was gonna get booze. I'm really appreciative of her, and then we have a Facebook group and a page. We also have an Instagram account as well. So we've really just been able to become a force in this community. And I ask anyone who hasn't been a part of Black Tennessee Voices, please like, subscribe, and do all those things. And for those who have been doing that for the past 2 years, I sincerely thank you. This would not have been happening or been able to be a thing without you guys. So I really do appreciate your support. And then also, I want to give a quick shout out to Annika Exum, who's in the back. Yeah, stand up, Annika. There you go. She is a wonderful leader, and she's been pushing this the entire time. So she is amazing, and yeah, and she's also the new education reporter. So moms, dads, talk to her. There you go. All right. So that's a quick bit about Black Tennessee Voices. Now let's get on with the show, okay? Tonight is not going to be a TED Talk. It's not going to be a Toastmasters or How to Talk. Tonight is about storytelling. And to me, I think storytelling really happens when you have an open heart and an open mind to the stories that you're about to be hearing. So we invite you to do that tonight. Some of these stories are going to be polished and professional. Some of these are going to be raw and emotional. We invite you to accept them all, because that's how community change happens. So, without further ado, let me introduce our first storyteller, Kanita Patterson, who will now be telling her story of experiencing homelessness and becoming what she coins as the homeless CEO.
I got to adjust the mic down. So thank you so much, Tennessee Black Voices, for this opportunity to tell my story. This is a story all about how our life got turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the homeless CEO of Nashville, yeah. So that's exactly who the homeless CEO is. It is an innovative job of my organization, which is Visionaries Incorporated. And that is our nonprofit. It's a hybrid nonprofit, and it is also the parent company to Innovative Job Solutions, LLC, which the homeless CEO is an innovative job. And it tells the story of poverty and homelessness. So my story starts with being 4 times homeless. I actually was featured in a series done by David Plazis that was The Cost of Growth, and it was talking about gentrification. And so with that being in my story, the first time that I experienced being homeless was in Antioch was the location, and it was a cute little 5-bedroom home on Charmaine Court. And so Charmaine Court was a perfect home for my family. We did have Section 8 at the time. And I knew that home ownership was an option, but I didn't quite know how to go about it. And so from there, we ended up putting all our eggs in one basket, and we ended up being homeless for the first time. Thankfully, we had family to rely on because we didn't have any shelters that would take us as a whole family. And so from that time, the next time was going to be in Hermitage. And this is the part of our story. All of them are traumatic, each experience, each of the 4 times that we have been homeless. But this particular time, the family was separated because my husband got incarcerated. And this was because of self-defense. A truck tried to run us off the road, and as an equalizer, my husband shot at the tires. And so it ricocheted, and then it went above the truck driver's head. And so they, on the news, this was my first TV appearance, I had to go on the news and straighten them out because they said that my husband was a thug running around shooting in broad daylight in Hermitage. And so I was like, okay, this is not the story. I have to, bring honor to his name, basically, because that's not who he is. He's always been in the home with our children and also an awesome husband. So shout out, baby. So from that story, it was very traumatic with myself and my children. The crazy part about this is the judge gave us time to spend together before they locked them up. The fact that they considered this was like, okay, why even do it in the first place? And he was trying to defend himself, but none of that ever went really on record besides me standing up for him. And so from there, it ends up being our 3rd time homeless because, again, I had Section 8 when we were staying there. And so the landlord saw it as an opportunity to get his apartment back. And so I had a whole meeting with the judge, the Section 8 and everything, and nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. We just had 3 days to get out. Coincidentally, that house caught on fire. I did agree with the landlord to be out, so it went up in flames. Another news crew was there, and I was just like, forget it. I don't want to be on TV again at this point. So I just let that go. From there was our fourth time. I want to say Hermitage. No, this is the third time homeless, right? So Park at Hillside, this is where the gentrification series came in. I already did have Visionaries Incorporated at this time. And from there, I went to a town hall meeting that had my local council person there. And so with that, they heard me speak out about what had happened to all my neighbors. I started to see their items thrown into the trash can. In no regard to them, they were being evicted, and none of us knew really what was going on. And feeling that when I saw the newspaper heading saying that Park at Hillside had been sold for $20 million, my whole heart and life shattered. It felt like someone had ripped something out of me. Just to see all that happen to my neighbors, and they didn't know they had people power. We all didn't know we had people power to come back and take our lives back, and that we had a right to do so. So this is where my organizing career started, and I traveled the nation speaking out against things like this in gentrification. And that kind of sparked my whole career, even though I had Visionaries Incorporated already. And so it's a baby that I picked back up, and just is very important to know that you do have power as a tenant. And a lot of people don't know that. That's why I'm a voice for that. So after this happened with the Park at Hillside, we ended up moving to Cheatham County. It's the only place I kind of put my plea out there, because my children, we asked them what they wanted for Christmas one year that this was going on. And they said, Mama, we don't care about any gifts. We just want keys to a home. And that compelled me and my husband to find something. I just started telling my whole story to whoever I put it out there on Apartment Selector or whatever the case was, and someone reached back out to me. And so this was a 7-bedroom home that fit all my family. My family is a family of 7. It's myself, my husband, and the children, 5 children. And so that was everything for us. And this is where the series happened. David and George came out to my house. It's like, you have to go watch this series. It was amazing. I wasn't the only person they featured. All the stories are important. But this home, we planned on buying it. And so we didn't know too much about, again, the home buying process. This is something that needs to be taught in school, honestly, because a lot of people just don't know what you have to get a home. And so we tried to go through the process. We both had really good jobs. We did make $60,000 a year, but that's still poverty for a family of 7. And so we tried for a USDA loan. So just to back up a tiny bit, when I was 17 years old, we stayed in public housing. And then I did not know, this is something that's a very bad cycle in African-American person's life. So if you remember that song by Bone Thugs and Harmony, it's the first of the month. So we knew about that, and it's just a generational thing that you go and sign up for benefits, especially if you're living in public housing. So I did not know not to tell them my then boyfriend's name. So now, fast forward, almost 20 years later, we can't get this house because we have federal debt. So, and it's not only for him, it was myself with student loans, because I tried to go get an education, and that education kind of did not line up with my student loans, so there they sat. And with the USDA loan, they tell you that they have a process that they look beyond what's going on. No one did that for us. They just told us no by what they were looking at straight on paper. They were supposed to dig deeper and look. No one did it. And so that is the 4th time having to leave Cheatham County. And we ended up coming back to Nashville, but this was kind of the 4th time was the worst time. A lot traumatic happened in this moment. So the schools, this is about the time when the pandemic started, and a lot of people didn't know why they were getting sick, and just a lot of things happened. So nobody knows how to do the pandemic, right? So this is what happened to us. We end up homeless during the pandemic. We end up going to social services. They did try to help in a manner, but the social workers I had were really cruel and mean on purpose. A lot of the times, that's what my workers were. And so one told me that his wife worked for truancy and that he would be happy to turn me in because I didn't cut my camera on for my children during virtual school. And I explained to them I was in an uninhabitable place. So therefore, I can't cut on the camera. But he was so happy to try to turn me into his own wife. You know, just, I don't know. I can't tell you why still to this day. But that happens in social work. And so that is exactly why I am the homeless CEO. And that is exactly why I look out for other people, because I don't want the same hurt I went through for the other people to go through. Also, during this time, I have to say this, my baby brother was murdered. And so while that was going on, I actually kind of did the most work that I ever have done. I kind of got enthralled into it. Also, I had a coach during the time because I could finally afford one because of the pandemic. Right. And I invested in a coach, and she told me, she prayed with me, she let me cry it out. She went every step of the way that you could with the person, and I appreciate that because she helped to create the homeless CEO. I had visionaries set up into 4 sectors. It was building partnerships, and it's the tenant education. And then we have innovative job solutions, and then also like a statewide resident council. And so she told me to break that innovative jobs off to be a sustainer for the nonprofit. That was the best thing she could ever tell me to do, because I didn't think about it like that. I just had it all in the nonprofit. And so she always told me to go forth. One person told me I need to wait until I'm not homeless anymore. And if I had, I wouldn't build the capacity that I have so far. Our organization is underneath grassroots, so just that's a thing. That is really a thing. And I was talking to a grant person earlier today, and he was like, I've never heard it said like that before. We do need funding for lived experience because we know what happens underneath the belly of the beast. So that's kind of my story. I know it was supposed to be a slide or something. Okay, don't worry about the slide. So, but that's my story. My lived experience is it's the lived experience in action. That's what the homeless CEO is. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
The mic has changed. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much, Kanita. I really appreciate that. And that story that she was talking about was done by Mr. David Plazas here, right? I think, yeah. That is one of the great stories that we do at the Tennessean. And just a subtle plug to please subscribe to the Tennessean if you can. I think we have a sale going on right now, so please take advantage of it if you can. Our next storyteller coming up is Marissa Richmond. She will be telling her story of how she became an advocate. So.
Wow, I'm wearing the same blouse in the photo. Thank you, it's good to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a native of Nashville, and I currently teach history and women's and gender studies at MTSU, but I actually live in Nashville, so I'm one of those reverse commuters who's always stuck in traffic on I-24. My story begins with my parents. Neither one was from Nashville, but they moved here right before I was born. My dad got a job at Fisk University. My mom later got a job at TSU, but that was not immediate. But they came to Nashville with a commitment for social change. After all, this was 1958 when they moved here, and Nashville was very much a Jim Crow city. My mom grew up in Texas, so she experienced it firsthand and hated it. My dad was from Kansas, but they met in Louisiana, and he learned to hate it. And in fact, at the University of Kansas, he was not allowed to live on campus because he was black. He was a high school track star and was not allowed to compete for the KU track team because he was black. And so he came to hate racism. So when they moved here, they got involved. When the sit-ins started, just a few blocks from where we are today, my mom was pregnant with my younger sister. So she said, I'm going to get on the phone, which she was very good at doing. And she helped organize the business boycotts, saying if these businesses will not serve those students, then we're not going to spend money there. And this tactic had worked very effectively in Montgomery just a few years earlier in the bus boycott. My dad at Fisk made classroom space available to the organizers because sometimes the churches needed their space for their services, for their events. So he said, you can meet and organize at Fisk. So my parents got directly involved in supporting the sit-ins. So that's the sort of environment in which I was being raised and sort of the values I was being taught. When President Kennedy came to Nashville, my mom said, I want you to see the President of the United States. And every time he was on TV, she's like, that's President Kennedy. You're going to get to see President Kennedy. She was so excited. So we stood out on Lafayette Street over near where City Winery is today. And as the motorcade came by, which of course in those days, as we all know, was open limo, open top, as the president rolled right in front of me, I was there on the sidewalk waving, and he turned, he looked and smiled and waved right back at me. And I've been a committed political activist ever since. I didn't know what the hell the president did, but he was on TV, so that made him important. But as I grew up, I said, I want to make a difference. And it took me a while to sort of figure out exactly what niche, what issue I wanted to be involved in. In high school, my first big issue was hunger. There were stories around the world about hunger around the world, and I was kind of shocked at just how bad it was, even in here in the US. And I started to try to raise awareness with my classmates and figuring that the adults, our parents, knew a hell of a lot more than I did, and that perhaps somebody could find a solution to hunger if they were just made aware of it. I did learn an important lesson from that. I was a lone wolf. I wasn't involved in any organization. I wasn't connected to a broader anti-hunger movement. So I learned an important lesson about getting involved. The AARP commercial says if one person could do it alone, you wouldn't need AARP. Now, one person can make a difference, but it does help to have organization, and I learned that from that experience. In college, I joined the anti-apartheid movement. Many of us on our respective campuses were upset that our schools were investing money in the companies that were supporting apartheid, and we wanted our education not based on slave labor in South Africa. So we were fighting to get our schools out of South Africa. And years later, Bishop Desmond Tutu thanked American college students for those efforts, because we helped remove the financial underpinnings for apartheid and help them destroy it once and for all. Then in graduate school, I got more involved in standing up against American militarism. This was when Ronald Reagan got elected, and I had just moved to California as a graduate student, and of course a lot of people, particularly in Berkeley, had stood up against Reagan and his racism as governor. Now, as an adult, as a graduate student, we were shifting more towards his militaristic policies. And then when I moved to Washington, although I was stuck under the Hatch Act, I said I need to stay involved. But in recent years, I specifically got more involved and finally found my niche in fighting for transgender rights. A friend of mine, Christian Page, a native of Nashville, had moved to Chicago. And I was up there for a history conference and found out that the day before I arrived, Christian had been murdered. She had been strangled, stabbed 35 times, and then set on fire. This was in 1996, and to this day, no one has ever been arrested for the crime in Chicago. The shock of her murder, she was 24. The shock and the brutality of her murder shook me to my core and made me realize what I needed to be doing. At least once a year, I renew my commitment to Christian. I go out to Woodlawn Cemetery, and I stand at the foot of her grave, and I say, this is what I have done, and this is what I'm going to continue to do. And over the years, as we've learned more about anti-trans violence, one of the things I've learned is that the majority of the victims look just like me. They're Black, they're Latino. And those of us, when we come out of the closet, do not sacrifice being Black. My experiences as a Black person are just as legitimate, despite the fact that I'm also out as transgender. And so standing up and organizing at the local level, at the state level, and even at the national level is important. I'll speak to anyone and everyone, and that has included the President of the United States. I had the opportunity to meet the President Barack Obama in 2011. I've met the current President, Joe Biden, the current Vice President, Kamala Harris, the current Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And I always say, I'm an out trans woman, and we need you to do more. It's important that we stand up. And as we're looking particularly now at all of this anti-trans legislation, telling children they can't play soccer, telling children we don't want you to have access to health care, telling adults we don't want you in our workplace, that empowers the haters. That gives justification to the violence. And that's what myself and so many others are fighting for, fighting against, fighting on, because it's important. Because every child deserves the right to get an education. Fear of bullying, without fear of bullying, without harassment. So whether they want to play soccer or play violin, I'll use my teacher voice. Or just be in the math club. Those children deserve the same rights as every other, oh, it's back on. Deserve the same rights and opportunities as every other child. And those of us who are adults and are privileged and have survived to this point are using our space and our voices. I served 6 years on the Metro Human Relations Commission, 1 year as chair, the first out trans person to have a political appointee anywhere in the state of Tennessee. I served 4 years on the Democratic National Committee, the first and still only Black trans woman to hold a position on the DNC. And I'm currently the president of the Tennessee Federation of Democratic Women, and I'm only the second trans person to do that, and the first Black trans person. So I'm using every opportunity, every space I can get, because it's important that young people have an opportunity. And as an educator, and seeing this anti-education legislation from banning books, and this is Banned Books Weeks, by the way, to criminalizing me, because they have now targeted higher education, criminalizing me for teaching so-called divisive concepts, because I teach both African American history and LGBTQ history. If anybody's a criminal in the classroom, you're looking at him. But I won't back down. I will continue to fight because I made a commitment years ago. I continue to renew that commitment because I believe in equal rights and equal opportunity for all. And I thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
Forget how long of a walk it is up here. Thank you so much, Marissa. I really do appreciate that story. It was very powerful. Next up is Ashford Hughes. He's going to be telling his story. I am going to let him take it away.
And I'm gonna take this mic. I can't stand still sometimes. Good evening, everybody. Man, you know it's never really easy when you have to take certain reflective steps, and particularly as a black man, and begin to identify who am I? Where do I fit in this space? And how do I find myself in this space? For me, it has always been a battle dealing with understanding my testimony and understanding how my testimony is draped in a promise, a testimony about moving the needle for my community, and distinct transitions. That's going to be a theme of what I talk about today, distinct transitions. His name, his government name was James Evans Jr. We called him Junior. He was my best friend. July 15, 1998, I'm home for summer from TSU, walking home from Shoney's, and later that night I get a knock at my grandmother's door. Not unlike any other night staying with my grandmother, but this night was different. It was my friends telling me Junior had been killed. Junior had been killed in an alley behind a friend's home that we had spent many nights being friends, being around each other, and Junior died by himself that night. Mind you, Junior wasn't the first person, as I was 19, that I knew that had been killed or funeral I had went to, but what was different was Junior was my best friend. We spent the night together. We lived less than 2 blocks from each other. We learned to drive a car together. We fought each other. We played ball with each other. But importantly, we loved and we cared for each other. And that was a drastic, traumatic turning point for me. If any of you have ever been 19, 18, and not just lost a friend, but you lost multiple people you knew to gun violence, think about that. It hurt. It was painful. About 6 months later, another friend in the same crew was killed, 2 blocks from where Junior was killed, same community. More trauma. And as I'm thinking about this, a year and a half ago, another friend of mine, same crew, 40 killed by gun violence. Why? But I reflect back on Junior and my testimony and a promise to my grandmother. My grandmother was special to me. There's nothing like a grandmother's love. There's also nothing like a mother's love, but my grandmother and I, we watched Andy Griffith together. We watched In the Heat of the Night together. We watched wrestling together. She loved wrestling. We watched The Price is Right, the original Price is Right together, right? But the promise that I made to my grandmother, my best friend's mother, and my mother, looking in their eyes when I would come home and they would say, that was your friend. You were with him all the time. Is that gonna be you? What does that mean for you and your friends? There I had to make a promise to my grandmother that I stand on today, that I would not only change my trajectory, but I would make certain that everything that I did was focused on making certain that young black and brown boys in the community, and girls too, did not end up dead or in jail because the city around us and those elected officials didn't value my community, under-resourced my community, and didn't care to get to know who we were. So I changed my major at Tennessee State a couple of years later, getting myself together. It didn't happen overnight to political science because that was my change agent. But there still was more that I had to work on and more to come. So I talk about distinct transitions. So during that time, I grew out my hair. You know, you can't tell now, but I had locks for 8 years, right? And at that time, I'm working. I'm getting involved in politics. I'm working numerous at the Democratic Party, but I'm doing it because I have a love for community, the smell of the community, the look of the community. and I wanted to do better by it. And as I go through all of this work, working in a lot of rural communities where I'm the only black face knocking doors, I had to learn quickly about what Paul Lawrence Dunbar talked about, wearing the mask. Wearing the mask as a black man in this society, in white spaces, for security, for safety, to make it back home, not being always my authentic self in order to get the job done. But there was a point in time where even this, I had to take another step back. Working for a gentleman who was running for United States Senate, African-American gentleman, told me, and I will never forget this to this day, man, you got a lot of talent, son. You can do a lot of great things, but you're gonna have to cut your hair if you wanna take the next steps. Wow. I think about that coming from an African-American male wearing a mask. If anybody can relate to wearing a mask and having to peel that off, it's heavy. Wearing a mask is heavy in this society. And that took me aback. And oftentimes I got lost. I got lost in the mission of, man, I have to be successful. I have to provide. And that can lead to that mask being much, much more of a burden than a plea for freedom or liberation. So I had to come out of that. And I had to decide, who am I? Who am I to be in this space? That's not me. I grew up worshiping heroes like Huey Newton, Malcolm X, those people in my community, and this was not the burden that I was trying to bear. So I had to take a step back and realize this is not where I need to be. Distinct next transition. There were times I wanted to give up in this fight. Like many of us, I'm sure we all do sometimes. Man, it's just too much. I started out as a business major, got involved in politics, community organizing. I'm just gonna go back. My best friend now, we worked in a restaurant together for years. I'm just going back to the restaurant, man. Dealing with people is hard enough, right? Now you want me to tell me I gotta organize community and wear this mask and take it off? But the liberation behind not allowing anyone to define you, to mask you, to tell you what you need to be successful, man, it's a freedom. If I could just take my shirt and everything else off, that may be another show, but that's what it feels like to be free from that. And even though I wanted to quit, I didn't. Distinct transition. It's a time now, we all have been through this process of going through, and forgive my East Tennessee accent, I say COVID. I know it's a shorter word, but I can't get that East Knoxville out of me. We have that reset, sitting at home thinking, as I'm trying to work with two small kids, I'm sure you all know what that's like, and we're contemplating in isolation. Man, am I making the right moves? Am I doing what's necessary? Am I living up to my testimony? Am I still following the promise that I told my grandmother that I would do? Am I doing what's necessary for me not to mask anymore? I don't know if many of you have seen the movie School Days. I'm pretty sure some of you have. There's a scene at the end, Lawrence Fishburne playing that, revolutionary brother, comes to the courtyard, he just says, "Wake up! Wake up!" And this is when my mind gets to thinking, Ash, and it's okay to talk to yourself sometimes. I talk to myself. Don't nobody tell you it's not good to talk to yourself sometimes. Ash, what are we doing? Are we just trying to be successful? Or are we still grounded in the mission? Are we still grounded in purpose? Are we still grounded in the promise you made to your grandmother? That is my why. My why is also, and there was supposed to be maybe a picture up there, but there's also two little boys at home, a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old, that I do the work and I unmask and I stay within my promise because I dang sure do not want them to feel what death is like. what community death is like. So I'm passionate about giving them what they need, the tools to be successful and not to have to mask. I'm grounded in that Ernie Barnes picture, each one teach one, because that is my responsibility. I'm grounded in community and the Desmond Tutu theology around Ubuntu. I am because we are. That is what gives me purpose when the people are on the social media or they're reaching out saying that I'm the race baiter. I am the one that's causing CRT to destroy the community. I'm doing these things. It doesn't matter. I'm grounded in my promise and in my testimony and in being purpose-driven going forward. So my goal is to make certain that any young boy, particularly our black and brown boys, hear me, see me. Trauma doesn't have to rule over you and hold you down. Let it be your purpose, let it be your passion, but make sure that you stand firm on your promises. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for that story, Ashford. I really connected to this part about talking to yourself. If you ask my girlfriend, she'll probably see me in the room being like, she'll be like, what's going on? What are you doing? But thank you for that story, Good Ashford. That was really powerful. We're halfway there, guys. We're almost there. Next up is Ravida Rahman. She's going to be telling her story about her community in her village.
A favorite show of mine in 1985 was The Golden Girls. I think y'all like them too, huh? It was a story of 4 silver-haired ladies who had lived a lot of life together. One of the characters was Sophia, and she was a great storyteller. She would often start her story by saying, "Picture it, Sicily," and give the year and go on to tell her story. So tonight, in the spirit of Sophia, picture it, the summer of 1978 in Batesville, Mississippi. A beautiful, smart, bright little girl has moved into a whole new community that some would call a village. She has moved to a community where both of her grandparents live on the same gravel road, along with a host of cousins, aunts, uncles. Every relative you could possibly name was in this community. This was also a community where she could run across the road and play with her favorite cousin in this huge yard with all these gigantic pecan trees. This was also a place where if she was misbehaving or acting out of line, everybody knew who she was and would say, "Is that Nava's girl?" This was also a place that some would call a country kid's nightmare, because in the summertime, you had to get on the front porch and pick that big 5-gallon bucket of purple hull peas. Well, one day, this little girl and her mom head to town to go to the doctor. And as they get ready to walk in, she notices 2 doors to enter. Well, there was an unwritten rule in the community, and many people knew what that meant, but she didn't. She had just gotten there. But it meant one door was for white patients and one door was for black patients. So they head in, and her mom is talking to the receptionist, and she sees, the receptionist kind of housed in the middle, and she's looking through, and she sees a whole nother waiting room with white faces in it. So she asks her mama, "Mama, why are we over here and they over there?" "Shh," was her mother's response to her. Well, that little girl was me. And while the signs, the white-only signs were gone, there was still an unwritten rule in this community. And we had laws in place to desegregate, but people in power chose not to do that. And so they continue to allow these Jim Crow policies to allow racism to fester, grow, and thrive. She goes, I'm sorry, y'all. She goes on, and this is the same town where her grandmother was the first Black woman in that county to be registered as a voter, as a Black woman. And she paid dearly for that right by being prevented from teaching in that county and had to teach in a neighboring county. Ma was also, we affectionately called my grandmother Ma. Ma was a person who just really advocated and worked to connect communities. And that was often seen in her activism and the work that she was doing, which often led to her being arrested for her activism in Jackson, Mississippi, along with 744 other people who were protesting at the state's capitol. My village wasn't one that just walked the walk. They talked the talk as well. And they really worked to empower and tell others in the community about the strength that we had to kind of uplift us and encourage us. But I could also see these things. The village was also at work in my community through, The village was also at work in my community through other people who were involved as well. So the village was at work at one time when the village provided encouragement and endurance as well. And this was evident the time that I got a brand new red Honda three-wheeler. I was a tomboy. And we didn't have helmets back then. So I got my new three-wheeler in the 6th grade, and I go down to show my grandmother Ma, and I pick up my cousin David and put him on the back. And David is having a good time until I crashed into a light pole. And so he jumps off and he's laughing and giggling, and I'm crying, running in to talk to Ma. And she gives me a hug, and she tells me, "Come here, put some Vaseline on it, because Vaseline healed everything." But she also sent me back out there to conquer the three-wheel beast. And she told me to not let that hiccup stop me. So this is one of the things, and one of the things that has created the woman and the mother that I am today. So even though we had all of those things going on with the racism, my village provided so many fun memories, even though we had those other memories. Fun memories like catching fireflies in a mason jar on a dust day. Or memories like going in the woods on adventures with my cousins, trying not to get lost, and making sure we would find our way back. Or there were memories like my uncle's fish fries, where everybody would be gathered around waiting to eat some hot golden brown fish. We didn't have French fries. We had homemade French fries from potatoes and hush puppies. So this is the kind of community that I had, and also the kind of community that I want for my family. So if Sophia were here today, she would say, picture it, Williamson County, Tennessee, 2022. There's a group of bright, beautiful brown kids who are joined together through a common bond, and that's their parents' friendships. This group loves to hang out together. They are each other's keeper. They strive for greatness. They push each other to do better. And they also hold each other accountable. Everything is not rosy. They have their disagreements, but with the wisdom from their parents, they seem to work it out. This village has also experienced racism as well. They get ready to head to school, and they're in classes with their classmates, and they've had their classmates throw paper on the floor and ask them to pick it up. And she thought she was doing it as a nice gesture, but after she did it, they called her a slave. We've had kids in this village who have been walking home from school and had classmates yell and call them the N-word from across the street. We've had kids who have been in the bathroom and heard their white friends and they're talking about how they would love to get the N pass. Do y'all know what that is? It's a pass that you give a white student so that they can say the N-word in the presence of their brown friends, so they can be perceived as cool. And some of these kids have suffered and handled this with shock at being called the N-word at school, only for the village to show up and have a conversation with the culprit. This group of kids involves my kids, and I call them the fish fry kids, and some of them are here today. Kids who are experiencing racism at an alarming rate that I didn't even experience in its boldness at that doctor's office waiting room in 1978. These are things that they are experiencing and that they're going through. That is very troubling for me as a parent. One of our family friends, James, started an idea of us having the family fish fry. How ironic, I like fish, can y'all tell? So we would meet one Friday a month, rotating at different families' houses, so that we can make sure that our kids had time with other children that looked like them, because most of their time at school is spent as being the only black kid in the room. So we wanted to make sure that they have that community, that they're able to do that. And so my hope for this village and this fish fry kids is that they continue to be active, they continue to be involved, that they learn how to speak up and advocate for themselves, so that one day there'll be a new story to tell. Now, I'm looking around. I'm gonna be 49 in a couple of months. I don't think I'm that old, but when we often talk about civil rights, the civil rights movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1969, we think of that as being something in our past, but it just goes to show how these things are current. So the new story that we hope to tell, that some of y'all may not be here when that time comes, I may not either, but I want you to walk with me anyway. Picture it. Somewhere in Tennessee, the year is 2052. Those kids are gonna be moving throughout their communities, and they're not gonna have to endure racial slurs. Those kids are gonna be moving throughout their lives, and they will not have to feel as if they don't belong. Those kids will have their own village, and their own village of support to work with them and prepare them based on the generations that came before them and what has been done. The fish fry kids, many of their experiences make them the fabric of who they are and what we hope that they become and what they end up being. So with this new generation that's coming, they will not be cut from a quitting cloth. They will be cut from a strong fabric that's intertwined and woven together. And like me, the descendants of the fish fry kids in their own village will be their ancestors' wildest dreams. Thank you.
Wow, that makes me feel good, a little bit. How you guys doing? You doing good, good? Some great storytelling tonight, right? Yeah, awesome. Well, we're not done. Next up is the youngin of the group. Kedron Turner is gonna be our next storyteller. He's gonna be talking about his life growing up in Pulaski, Tennessee. Come out.
I'm gonna grab this mic because I can't stay in one place. So first off, thank y'all for coming out and hearing our stories today. As LeBron said, well, he didn't mention this part, but I'm actually a senior at Belmont University here in Nashville. Yeah, thank you. We'll see if I pass. Well, in the spring. But basically, while I'm at Belmont, I spend most of my time here in Nashville. But actually, my hometown is an hour south on I-65, and it's a little small town called Pulaski, Tennessee. So just a quick show of hands, who knows where Pulaski is and what it, okay, good amount of people, cool. So if you don't know, if you didn't raise your hand, Pulaski's big moment in Tennessee history, as well, I guess, national history, is that it's known for being the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan in America. Now, of course, that opens up a host of different problems, especially as a black person who's grown up there. Usually when you tell people you're from Pulaski, you get this shady and mysterious look from strangers who know where Pulaski is and know the history there. I mean, honestly, I think they're more shocked that there's a black person that's come from a place like that. Sometimes, personally, and this is terrible, but it's just the nature of Pulaski. Sometimes, as a black person, when you're walking around, you see an old white person, and they look at you funny, you automatically assume they used to be a part of the Klan. It's a thing. It's a process. But for me, there's one part of Pulaski's history that I struggle with most, and it's not the history of the KKK. It's actually, more recently, a history I'm struggling with every single time I have to go back to Pulaski and see it. And it's actually the story of Sam Davis and how Pulaski forces me to honor him. So, a little backstory on who Sam Davis is. Basically, Sam Davis is a Confederate soldier from Smyrna, Tennessee, who volunteered for the Army and was captured and hung in Pulaski as a spy. That's basically it. That's his entire story in a nutshell, one or two sentences. Why? Because it's such a common story within the Civil War of a spy being caught and hung. Despite how simple and common his story is, Pulaski and Middle Tennessee honors Sam Davis as a hero. And Pulaski won't let anyone, including me, forget his history. So how does Pulaski force me to honor Sam Davis? Well, as you can see in this picture, we have a big, tall statue of Sam Davis right in the middle of town square, a square where everybody of all genders and ethnicities and races are supposed to feel welcome. Down the street by our football stadium, where all the Friday night football games happen, where a whole town meets up on Friday to watch high school and middle school football, is under the lights of Sam Davis Park. Across the street from that park is a street named Sam Davis Avenue. And on that street is a museum, guess what, for Sam Davis, at the spot where he's hung. Personally, I started learning about Sam Davis in 4th and 5th grade. And that didn't include just seeing these statues and symbols about Sam Davis in town and learning his history in classroom. That included taking field trips to Smyrna, to his plantation, and learning his history all over again. That included taking a trip to where he was captured near Pulaski and learning about this heroic sacrifice he made for the South. Learning and hearing about this boy hero of the Confederacy became constant within my early childhood and education in Pulaski, Tennessee. All these symbols are meant to honor this spy, this soldier. But that's the problem, because while you're trying to honor the spy, the soldier, you're also honoring the terrible cause he chose and volunteered to fight for. As a black Southerner from Pulaski, Tennessee, I don't get to choose whether or not this soldier is an American hero. As a black Southerner, Pulaski forces me to believe that the soldier who volunteered and fought and died to keep my family, my ancestors, people like me in slavery, is the American hero I should aspire to be. And the thing about it, as a young kid, I didn't have any problem learning this history, learning these symbols. I just was confused. I thought, well, if Sam Davis is as good of a hero as everybody says he is, maybe this idea that the Confederacy is bad isn't something true, like my parents and my family tell me. Maybe this whole, the Civil War was about states' rights was actually true. Yeah. It's Pulaski. The point is that these symbols confused the narrative, confused me on what exactly the Civil War stood for, which is something you don't think anybody within the 21st century would ever question, and yet that was me in elementary and middle school. So that didn't change until about high school, where I started to question these symbols and their impact on young people. But those responses, those thoughts, were canceled out by responses by my classmates, my teachers, and friends. It's not about racism. It's about Southern culture and heritage. You know, just like Black history or, you know, the history of oppression isn't part of that Southern culture. So, of course, just because of those thoughts, because of those responses, I reverted back to elementary school Kedron. I just went throughout high school without questioning it, without questioning the impact these symbols had on young people. That didn't really change until I got out of Pulaski, graduated from high school, moved to Nashville, moved to Belmont, and experienced Nashville. Now, I didn't choose to go to college in Nashville just to escape racism. I think it's pretty hard to escape racism in the South. I wanted to go to school in Nashville because I wanted a broader perspective than the one that I had in Pulaski. And that included taking classes like Southern Politics with Dr. Vaughn May at Belmont, who taught me to critically think and think deeper into how this region has a conflict with racial justice. Now, that was in 2020, and that was also the year the pandemic hit and the death of George Floyd happened. And as a Black Southerner who's already fearing his life for COVID-19, I was absolutely furious that something like a global pandemic couldn't stop something like police brutality for more than 2 months. So after taking a class that talked about racial inequality and seeing the death of George Floyd from my own eyes, I decided that it was time for me to take my own action, my own stand against racism and host an equality march in my hometown. Ironically, my hometown is the birthplace of the KKK, so you can imagine how that went. Now, of course, when that came down, when I made that decision, I had never made a march before. I had never even participated in a protest before. But I knew in my heart that I wanted to take a stand against police brutality. But that also meant that, you know, being in the home of the Klan, I felt like the march in Pulaski could do something more. It could work to address something more. Something else that covers up the history of Black progress other than police brutality and violence. And that meant dealing with the Sam Davis issue in Pulaski. So me and the other organizers of the Equality March, Richard Kemp, Kelly Hamlin, Benita and Destiny Cross, and Laura McMasters, were going to help Pulaski remember Sam Davis rather than honor him by relocating the statue to a museum, renaming the park, and demanding that our city council replaces that statue with something more inclusive and relative to all Pulaskians who have to walk through that square. Thank you. Now, I have never seen so much hate and anger and disgust from Pulaski until I pressed the publish button on that video. All lives matter. And if you don't like that, then you're the one who's prejudiced. Maybe if you didn't do the crime, cops wouldn't have to be the way they are. You don't have the right to change our community just because one person was wrongfully killed. This one time at work that summer, when I announced the march, I had one person come up to me and say that I and other Black people should just stick to our side of the street, word for word, as if segregation had worked so well in the past. Despite these comments, we still marched on. Even some comments said that they were willing to show up to the protests, guns loaded, ammo ready, to protect that statue. And on August the 15th, we found out that they weren't bluffing about any of those statements. On August the 15th, 2020, me and about 100 other supporters of change and equality in Pulaski met on the square to march. Now, we expected to see some counter-protesters because of comments like those that you had saw. We expected to see more security on the square just because of the nature of the event. What we didn't expect to see was a whole crowd of counter-protesters, which each single person, either with a handgun, an assault rifle, or some type of tactical gear, like they were ready to shoot down all of us if we had even looked at the Sam Davis statue. What we didn't expect to see was a whole army of police officers swarm out of the courthouse right before the march started in tactical gear, as if we were about to see a repeat of something like Selma. What we didn't expect to see was a local store owner get arrested a few feet from me, right about where you are, just because he refused to take his hand out of his pocket, which was on his handgun, while he was walking through the middle of our crowd right before we started marching. It was as if Pulaski was willing to bring back the Klan and this idea of intimidation in order to make sure a statue that shows people like me of our low place in society stays in Pulaski. So to be honest, we were pretty frightened, as anybody would be. I mean, it'd be crazy to get on the stage and say that, I handled it like a boss. I was scared, my family who attended was scared, and the rest of the supporters were afraid. But despite that fear, we continued to march for equality in Pulaski, because where would we be, where could we go if we weren't willing enough to fight for equality despite that fear? So we continued. I continued to march to show that Black lives do matter in a society that fails to show that in something as simple as a history lesson. I marched in Pulaski for my white friends and neighbors who made those comments to show them that we can't settle any issue unless we're willing to cross the street and talk about it deeper, that's the word. And then most importantly, I continued to march that day despite all of the hate that we saw for little 10-year-old me, who had to wake up each morning, go to that square, pass by that statue, and wonder why the side that chose slavery was good. And more importantly, why the town that I proudly called home and continue to call home supports a man that was willing to die to keep my skin color in slavery. So that march happened 2 years to 5 months and 5 days from today. I did some calculations before. And after that march, well, as of today, that statue still stands on Pulaski Square in the same spot. The march may have not gotten the statue removed yet. It may have not gotten the stadium renamed yet. But it did something far greater than I ever expected when it came to publishing that video on YouTube and making that petition. What it did was start a good, productive, effective, deep conversation within Pulaski about change, a conversation I didn't know was possible with Pulaski. So what does that conversation look like? Well, after the march, the Pulaski revealed a plaque honoring a famous Black sports announcer at Sam Davis Park, a part of history that I never knew about Pulaski, Tennessee, until that plaque was revealed. After the march, Pulaski created an advisory council to kind of recognize and honor the underrepresented history of Pulaski, of underrepresented groups. The second meeting of that advisory council, they decided to make their first project the U.S. Colored Troops of Pulaski, a piece of history that I had never heard about before then. Even this summer, Pulaski revealed a plaque honoring the first Black elected official of Pulaski. Again, a piece of history I never knew about. I'm guessing you guys are starting to see the pattern, right? The point is, Pulaski is finally trying to have a real conversation about the history that things like Sam Davis and Confederate symbols cover up. A conversation that little high school, middle school me didn't have the courage nor the luxury of having with people. Am I still angry that the Sam Davis statue is still up? Absolutely. Am I mad that the stadium isn't renamed yet? Absolutely. Do I want to hit the statue with a sledgehammer every time I see it? Yes. Will I do it? Maybe, we'll see. But I know in my heart that Pulaski will recognize that the Sam Davis statue and its story needs to come down as soon as the town known for hate realizes how much hate remains in the town from symbols like that. I think Pulaski is trying to understand more that oppression and racism isn't as obvious sometimes as a white hood or a burning cross. Sometimes it's more subtle, but just as evil as a statue or a flag or a symbol or a twisted history lesson. So if my story caused all of this change in Pulaski to happen, I can't wait to see what happens when the town known for hate, the hometown of the KKK, kicks out the boy hero of the Confederacy. Thank you for allowing me to tell my story.
I was not doing all that stuff at 21. I just want you to know that. I was trying to open up a savings account. So like, congrats to you, Kedron. Oh boy. Are you guys having a good night? Good, great. Before our last storyteller, I wanted to do a little something. Can all of the Tennessean reporters raise their hand real fast, please? You can raise a little bit higher. I can see you. You can raise a little higher. Okay, so guys, I want you all to look at these reporters, look at them, get their names, okay? Figure out who they are after the show. This is a part of the whole community thing I'm talking about, right? They want to be a part of, like, your story, right? They want to tell your story. They want to be, storytellers, right? They're the ones that are writing the stories, right? And so if you have a source for them or a tip, please let them know. I really believe that our job is the best when we have people engaged with us. So, yeah. So our last storyteller is Alyssa Ditro. She will be telling her story about growing up as a mother. Being a mother, sorry.
They say trauma in a person, decontextualized over time, looks like their personality. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time, becomes their family traits. Trauma in a people, decontextualized over time, becomes their culture. I've always loved early childhood education. It was my first job in high school. My mom had 2 rules. First, my job could not interfere with my education. I have a military mom, she is here tonight, and she took my education seriously. The second rule is that job could not interfere with that education. So I got a job at the church nursery around the corner, right? Sunday mornings, no way that could interfere with work. I fell in love with children. I fell in love with the idea of watching them learn and grow. As an only child who moved around a lot, I liked the idea of being able to form deep bonds and connections with children and families. So I spent the rest of my time playing with babies, going to school for early childhood development, and then going to grad school for early childhood development and education. Like I said, I really, really, really love kids. However, this all kind of was exciting until a certain point in 2016 when I found out I myself was going to become a parent. Oh, cool. I knew how to take care of other people's children, right? I knew how to give them back at the end of the day. But I didn't know how to be a parent. But as a type A planner, I did all the things with my husband. We took parenting classes. We took birthing classes. We did our family history. We don't want this child to have any illnesses we're unaware of, right? We even took a hospital tour. I didn't know you could do that, but listening to someone give birth while pregnant is terrifying. Do not recommend the hospital tour for anybody. So, we are prepped. We have first aid CPR certification. And I'm also an early childhood educator, right? I know exactly what I'm doing. So, imagine how irritated I was the fall of 2016 when the Department of Human Services had the audacity to tell me and every other early childhood educator in the state of Tennessee that we needed to take a training on adverse childhood experiences. Cool, don't care, right? It's an 8 a.m. training, I need my hours, I'm tired, and I am pregnant. So I load up in the car with some of my friends, and we're driving to the training, we're having a grand old time. Let's get this done. Well, then we sit down for the training, and we get our ACEs questionnaire. Have you ever taken an ACEs questionnaire? Yay. Well, sorry if you haven't tonight, you get to take one in your brain. So, in a room where I was one of maybe 3 other Black people, we got to take this questionnaire. And if any of these things had happened to you before your 18th birthday, you needed to check yes or no. Did you feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect or take care of you? Did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or other reason? Did you live with anyone who is depressed, mentally ill, or attempted suicide? Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? Did your parents or the adults in your home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten to harm themselves or each other? Did you live with anybody who had ever been incarcerated? Did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? Did a parent or adult in your home ever hit, beat, kick, or physically hurt you in any way? Did you feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were special? Did you experience unwanted sexual contact, such as fondling or any other penetration, by family or otherwise? Did you experience racism? Did you experience bullying? Did you see sibling abuse? Did you experience homelessness? Were you in the foster care system? These are just the top 15, right? So if, like me, you had more than one, congratulations. If you had more than 5, congratulations. You're in a super rare category, and you probably have a lot of thoughts about that if you realized you had a lot of ACEs. I did too in that moment. In fact, one, I was really irritated. How dare I be given a test I wasn't prepared for, right? I am a high performer. Had I known I was taking this ACEs test, I would have just lied, honestly, right? Like, I would have just lied. But 2, I felt extremely ashamed in that moment because sitting with the people I drove with, their ACEs score was a lot lower. And again, everyone I went with was white. So, pregnant, I drove home, decided not to tell my husband about the mentally ill person he had married because it was way too late to back out now, right? That's how it felt in the moment. I'm married to a white man. I felt immediately ashamed. I knew that this was a big mistake on his end, and I needed to never discuss ACEs with him. Well, life has a funny way of working those things out for us. On Valentine's Day of 2017, I had my son, and I immediately went into a tailspin. I suffered severely from postpartum anxiety. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, couldn't do much of anything except be up and read about ACEs. And what I found out was that, one, my testimony of myself feeling broken and ashamed was common among other Black women. And in fact, 61% of Black people have at least one ACE, where our white counterparts, that's 39%. So I knew in the moment, one, I needed to work on myself, right? My ACE score was not a condemnation of me as a person or my mental health. But 2, as I looked down at the baby sleeping on my chest that had just finished nursing, I knew that he and those that I worked with in early childhood education needed me. They needed me to tell my story. They needed me to be a Black person that owns their mental health, and they needed my vulnerability. So I decided to get my infant mental health associate endorsement with the state of Tennessee. It was 18 months of a lot of soul searching, a lot of digging, and honestly confirmation that BIPOC people, and more importantly, Black people, are marginalized at an incredibly high rate that creates structural racism that is unbearable for us to be on our own, truly. And most of what we're dealing with starts in early childhood education. So I was in the middle of getting my infant family associates, and I truthfully was working in an extremely all-white environment. I worked at an all-white Christian church. Yay. I was the only Black person. It was super fun. I got to hear things like, wow, can I touch your hair? And we're diverse? What do you mean? You and your son come here. Super fun times, super fun. So I decided that it was critical not only for my personal mental health to make a job change, but it was critical for the children that looked like my son. So last year, I decided to take a job at the McNeely Center for Children in East Nashville. Now, if you don't know McNeely, you're gonna learn about it because I love it. McNeely's been established since 1916, but more importantly, almost every single child in my care and those that I work with looks exactly like me. Their parents look like me. They have the same ACEs as me. They're struggling in the same ways as me. And I can sit in my office and be honest with parents and say that this is not our culture, that we can change it, that I'm here to walk alongside you. It's scary to do things differently, right? It's scary to be the first person in your family to say, hey, I talked to my doctor. Turns out I'm anxious. And I got on medication for it, right? It's really hard in the Black community to talk about those things. Or, hey, I'm going to therapy. Well, what are you talking about? What are you telling your therapist, right? It's up to me to be vulnerable for the children in my care. I invite you guys to come look at what we're doing at McNeely with our children. We have an amazing conscious discipline program. And watching a 5-year-old take themselves to the meditation corner because they're overwhelmed is truly mind-blowing. Watching them do yoga underneath the fig and pear trees means so much to me. Watching parents who previously were spankers and yellers come and say, we do things differently now in our house, that's generational curse breaking. So I encourage you, if you're struggling with your mental health, to reach out. That's it.
Great job, Alyssa. You had me at fig tree and yoga, so thank you. Well, that is our show, everyone. We want to bring back all of these storytellers for a final bow. Can you help me? Yeah, come on, bring them up. Okay, now that I have you here, that's our show. I just want to remind you guys, applications are open for next year's Black Tennessee Voices Storytelling event. So if you want to be a storyteller, please let me know or Annika know, and we'll connect with you. So yeah, I hope you guys have a great night. I hope that you have a safe drive back. Thank you.